Once upon a time, in a small town, there was an old abandoned house that sat at the edge of the forest. The locals claimed that it was haunted, and many had heard strange noises and seen eerie shadows moving inside. However, nobody dared to enter it, for fear of what they might encounter. One night, a group of teenagers decided to explore the house, as they were feeling adventurous and wanted to prove to their friends that they were brave enough. They gathered at the entrance of the house, holding flashlights and trying to calm their nerves. As they walked inside, they could feel a sense of unease and darkness enveloping them. The house was in a state of disrepair, with cobwebs and dust covering every surface. As they ventured further in, they heard creaking floorboards and faint whispers, causing their hearts to race. Suddenly, one of them spotted a painting on the wall that appeared to be following their movements. They quickly brushed it off as their imagination, but the feeling of being watched lingered. As they turned a corner, they found themselves face to face with a strange figure standing in the middle of the room. The figure was shrouded in darkness, but they could make out glowing eyes staring at them. The group froze, unable to move, and watched as the figure began to slowly move towards them. They tried to run, but the doors and windows seemed to be locked, trapping them inside. The figure grew closer and closer, and its eyes seemed to be burning into their souls. Suddenly, it let out a blood-curdling scream, and the group felt a cold wind rush past them. When they turned around, they saw that the figure had disappeared, leaving them alone in the darkness. They frantically searched for a way out, but all the doors and windows were still locked. Finally, they found a hidden passage that led them outside. As they emerged from the house, they saw that the forest around them had grown dark and menacing, and they could hear strange whispers echoing through the trees. They quickly ran back to their homes, vowing never to return to the haunted house again. Years passed, and the old abandoned house remained untouched, but the locals claimed that they could still hear strange noises coming from within. Some even claimed that they had seen the figure wandering the halls, still searching for its next victim. And so, the legend of the haunted house continued to live on, sending shivers down the spines of those who dared to venture too close. Despite the terror that they experienced that night, the teenagers couldn't help but be drawn back to the house. They were fascinated by the mysterious figure that they had encountered and wanted to know more about the history of the haunted house. So, they started doing research, combing through old newspapers and talking to the locals. They discovered that the house had once belonged to a wealthy family, but tragedy struck when their youngest daughter went missing. The family was devastated, and the mother never recovered from the loss. She became obsessed with finding her daughter and spent the rest of her life searching for her. As the teenagers delved deeper into the story, they realized that the figure they had encountered was the ghost of the missing daughter. She had never been found, and her spirit had been trapped in the house, unable to move on. The group was determined to help the ghost find peace and put her spirit to rest. They returned to the house, armed with knowledge and a newfound bravery. They called out to the ghost, asking her to show herself. At first, there was no response, but then they heard a faint whisper calling out to them. They followed the sound of the voice and found themselves in a small room. There, in the center of the room, was the ghost of the missing daughter. She was holding a locket in her hand, and tears were streaming down her face. The teenagers approached her slowly, trying not to startle her. They asked her if she needed help, and she nodded her head. They took the locket from her hand and examined it closely. Inside, there was a picture of the missing daughter and her mother, with the words "always together" engraved on the back. Realizing that the locket was important to the ghost, the teenagers decided to return it to the mother's grave. They ventured out into the forest, with the ghost following closely behind. As they approached the grave, they placed the locket on top of it. Suddenly, a bright light shone from the locket, and the ghost of the missing daughter disappeared. The teenagers stood in awe, realizing that they had helped put the ghost to rest. They left the grave, feeling a sense of peace and closure. From that day on, the haunted house was no longer haunted. The locals could still hear strange noises coming from within, but they were no longer afraid. They knew that the ghost had finally found peace, and the legend of the haunted house became a distant memory.